back. My name is Alex Lamontes. This is the Circle City Conversations podcast, where we talk with some of the best lawyers and business people in the state of Indiana and in Indianapolis.
And then thanks to our sponsor, Hearst Lamontes, an Indiana law firm representing injured Hoosiers and their families for over 50 years. I am here with my friend, Emily Guenin-Hodson of Guenin Law Office, PC, located in Wabash, Indiana. Emily is a fantastic trial lawyer who, like me, likes to help people seek justice. And thanks for being here, Emily.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You are welcome. So let's just start like real simple. Where are you from?
Well, as you said, I'm from Wabash, Indiana. I was actually born in Wabash, and I lived there all my life, except for I did do my undergrad at Butler in Indianapolis, and then I went down to IU Maurer School of Law in Bloomington. And then I came back to Wabash and have been practicing there ever since.
What high school did you go to there, Wabash?
Actually, I went to Northfield High School.
Okay.
So Wabash has, I guess Wabash County has more than this, but we have 2 country schools.
Okay.
And then the city school. So I was one of the country school girls. So we were, north of a field. And so it was at Northfield is where I went.
So you graduated from Butler. And then, so what made you want to go to law school?
I was actually fortunate because my dad practiced law and was an attorney in Wabash. He came from a farming family. So he was the first lawyer in our family. He and his brother and sister all went to college, which was a very big deal for his parents. So they were very excited that they accomplished that. And then he went on to law school and then practiced in Wabash. And so I saw him growing up, and I really admire my dad. I work with him now, and I wanted to be like him. So he was my inspiration, and he's the reason that I decided to go into law school. And
your dad, Mark?
Yes.
Guenin.
Yes.
He's another ITLA member and supporter and a great lawyer as well. And
Thank you. I agree.
So let's talk about, you went to Maurer, graduated, and did you immediately go back and start working with your dad?
I did. When I was at Maurer, I did do some externship work in, I guess it was Owen County, so it was near Bloomington. But then I knew I wanted to go back to Wabash. I don't think that my dad actually thought I would come back and practice with him, even though I always said I was going to. But he was excited that I was going to. It's interesting now, though, because I have a sophomore and a senior in high school. So they have both at various times talked about wanting to come back and practice with me. And I'm both very excited about it, but also very nervous about it because it's giving me a different perspective from what my dad would have seen. I just assumed he'd be excited for me to come back, which he was. But there's also, as a parent, there's an element, I think, of nervousness because you're now responsible for in some degree, your child's livelihood and success. So if the law practice doesn't go well, then you're not only affecting yourself, but also your kids. So I'm seeing it from a little bit different perspective 20 years later. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah. And, my oldest, he's only 10. So, but he's mentioned maybe going to law school. And even when I talk to younger people that say, they want to go to law school, the first thing I always ask is why? Because, and you probably would agree with me. I mean, it's a big commitment.
It is.
And life-changing, Yeah.
Yes.
So early on in your career, you had an opportunity to argue in front of the Supreme Court?
I did. And this is, I guess it's a little funny. So my dad, again, he always practiced in Wabash. My mom is also from Wabash. So they made a deal. They got married when my dad was an undergrad. And the deal was she would support him through undergrad and through law school, but then he had to come back to Wabash because that's where her family was from. So they made this deal. He came back, and that's where he's always practiced, but he'd worked with a few different offices over that course of time. When I came back from law school, he was out on his own and had a case that I think by the time I got involved in it, they had lost at the Court of Appeals level.
Okay.
And, freshly out of law school, I didn't know anything, but I didn't really know that I didn't know anything. So everything was new. So we decided, or I was looking at this and I was like, there's this thing called a petition to transfer. And as a good father and mentor does, he's like, oh, okay, well, if you want to look into it, go ahead. He didn't have a problem with me looking into it. But at the same time, he's going, nobody's ever gets these petition to transfers granted. It's kind of a waste of time. But if you're interested, I'll support you.
Yeah.
He did not say that to my face. He's just very encouraging through the whole thing. Oh, sure, go for it. So we file a petition to transfer, and lo and behold, it gets granted.
Wow.
It was the first time that he had ever been to the Supreme Court as well. But we filed that. And so my first argument ever in front of a court was at the Indiana Supreme Court. So I had not been in any trial court. I had not been at any hearings on anything. But that was my first oral argument, was in front of the Indiana Supreme Court. And again, I didn't know anything anyway, and didn't know. I was probably as nervous there as I would be anywhere else, because everything was new. So
right, you were so young. It was hard, young in your career.
Yes,
hard to grasp.
Correct. Now, I do think I had some advantage because the justices at the time recognized that I was very young, and my dad actually shared the time with me, so it gave me an opportunity to do some of the argument. But I do think they realized it. So I got some hot questions. I got several softball questions, which I appreciated. But it was a good experience. So
yeah. Yeah. And since then, you've done more appellate work, right?
I have. And I really enjoy the appellate work. I've been involved in ITLA's amicus committee, so I've written several amicus briefs, done a lot of appellate work on my own. And then I've also had other attorneys that have contacted me to help assist them in their appellate work. And I do enjoy that.
Do you, as far as your appellate work goes, we'll talk a little bit more about your practice later, because I know you do different areas of law. Have you done different areas of law in the Court of Appeals levels, or is it usually just personal stuff?
It's always on the civil side of things, but yeah, I've done it in other areas as well. We've had some real estate issues, some estate administration disputes. Let's see. I think there's been a couple issues that have involved businesses. So it's varied, but it's always been on the civil side. Yeah.
We'll talk a little bit more about the appellate work later. I wanted to ask you a little bit. You mentioned ITLA.
Yes.
Which stands for the Indiana Trial Lawyers Association.
Yes.
You are the 4th female president of that organization, right?
I am.
Which is really cool.
Yeah, I'm honored to be part of it. So.
And I've had the pleasure of working with you on the executive committee for years now. And so for our listeners that don't know much about what the ITLA does, just tell us a little bit about the Indiana Trial Lawyers and kind of what they do.
So the Indiana Trial Lawyers is an organization of approximately 820 attorneys throughout the state of Indiana, with a common goal of advocating for and preserving the rights for civil justice. There's a focus on personal injury, medical malpractice, workers' compensation, things of that nature. But it's really aimed at helping those throughout the state who have been injured due to the negligence of others. And it works both in the legislative realm, it works through the courts, through the appellate realms, and then it also is very good at informing our membership as to things that they can do and that we can do to help our individual clients as they progress through their cases.
And then, a lot of great programming too.
Yes. Right? And that's the whole part about helping our membership. A lot of it is through continuing legal education, which I know that you're intimately familiar with and do a fantastic job of finding programs that are going to be able to assist other attorneys to help their clients in a myriad of ways. So the programs that are put on I'm just amazed at how top-notch they are, how informative they are, and how they've helped, not only others, but me personally become a better lawyer. And by becoming a better lawyer, I'm able to assist my clients.
Yeah, I will say one of my, if not maybe my most favorite thing about the ITLA is that they subscribe to the concept of a rising tide raises all ships, and we all help each other from the listserv to sharing information, and I think it's fantastic. So One of the things that some people don't know much about what the ITLA does, they work in the legislature. Is that right? So kind of what's some of the stuff they're doing over there?
So what we do is we kind of keep an eye on various bills that are coming up for review and consideration. And we monitor those because we want to make sure that whatever laws get passed in Indiana are laws that are going to benefit the citizens of Indiana and not just a particular group that happens to have really great lobbyists.
Right.
So really we are an organization that's designed to and works diligently to protect the interests of the citizens of Indiana, so that if they become harmed in some way or if something negative happens to them, they have rights, they have recourse, and that they can seek justice.
Yeah. Access to justice, right? Access
to justice, access to the courts. And through all of that, we have various people who will, and I think what's important here is that we see our role primarily to explain to the legislators what the consequences of their decisions are. I mean, our legislators in Indiana have a lot of power. And with, I feel like I'm talking about a superhero movie, but with that power comes great responsibility. And sometimes because, for whatever reason, they may not realize all of the consequences that come with their actions. How, giving, passing an indemnity law may affect others down the road. Right. It's not that there's a bigger picture out there. So what we try to do is really talk to the legislators and explain how, yes, this is just, you're looking at it, in this context, but there's a lot of other contexts out there.
Right.
And there's a lot of other things that can happen as a result of this decision that you're making. So you want to not only protect this interest group, but let's look at all of the harm that may come if that happens. And so we do work defensively to try to protect from laws that may be bad for the citizens of Indiana. But we also look, at offensive laws. Yeah. And, how can we make people's lives better? Not just not just defensively, let's not make them worse, but how can we actively improve those lives? So that's what ITLA is primarily set out to do.
Yeah. What a fantastic way to describe it. They really do help educate the legislators. And in their defense, they've got so much stuff coming at them from so many different ways, and it's hard for them to see that picture, right? Especially down the road.
Exactly. And like you said, our legislators are not just looking at at ITLA, we're kind of focused in on a certain type of law.
Yeah.
And, we recognize, because we've dealt with it for a number of years, how these laws can have these consequences. But our legislators deal with a wide array of different laws.
Yeah.
So like you said, our goal is to educate because they may not otherwise know.
Right.
They haven't had a reason necessarily to know those things. So if we can bring that information to them to help them make informed decisions, that's what we see our goal as.
Yeah. So, and they throw great parties at ITLA too.
Yes.
You talked a little bit about your working as amicus counsel through ITLA.
Yes.
Let's just delve a little bit more into the appellate work. So if you could describe the major difference between doing trial work versus appellate work, how would you kind of describe that?
Oh, that's an excellent question. So I think one way I could describe it is that in trial work, we are telling a person's story. The story about, and usually it's a sad story, a story about how they were harmed and why they were harmed and what could be done because they were harmed. So we're telling that full story. In appellate work, we're drilling down on just part of that story because usually, at the appellate level, we've already had a trial. And then there's been one issue that's been appealed, or sometimes there's two issues that are appealed. But it segments off just one sliver of that story. And so at the appellate level, we're focusing in on that one aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to remember that even though for the appeal purposes, we're looking at just that one aspect, that not to mix my metaphors, but that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Right.
So there's still all of this context that goes with it. So it's a balance of trying to explain to the appellate judges that not only is this a critical issue that needs to get decided, but there's all this backstory that comes into it, and that whatever decision they're making is going to have a real impact on this person's life and is going to have a real impact on others who are similarly situated.
Yeah. Yeah. I had my appellate case, and I like to say that I'm undefeated and I'm never going to do it again.
Going out on top, huh?
Right. If I had to describe the difference, I would say when in trial, I get to talk to people, and in appellate arguments, I get really intelligent people stopping me in the middle of my argument and asking me an even smarter question that I can't really answer.
There is a difference with it. Yeah, they definitely bring different views to what's going on.
Right, right. So we talked a little bit about you practice with your dad,
yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just you and your dad in your office?
We're the only two attorneys, correct?
Okay. So is there some advice that you can give to maybe a young lawyer, someone that's starting out that wants to practice with family, whether it be dad, mom, sister, cousin, or even, let's say, go into business with family?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think what helped me early on is, I've always had a good relationship with my dad. I've got a good relationship with both of my parents. But I've always felt very comfortable admitting the things that I didn't know.
Yeah.
And I think hopefully a lot of people have a good relationship with the family that they're going to go into business with, where they don't feel like they have to have all of the answers. So when I could go to my dad and say, I don't know how to do this, and just express, I'm overwhelmed, do you have any guidance? Do you have any advice? Being upfront, yeah. I think is very critical, because that gives him an opportunity to help me through it, mm-hmm. or just to give me a pep talk that says, it'll be okay, it gets better, but here's a resource you can look at in the meantime. So I think just having those honest conversations from the beginning sets a good stage moving forward.
Yeah, and helps that relationship grow.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's switch gears a little bit to something more recent, the 2023 Summit for Rural Justice and Public Health Professionals.
Yes.
It was held on October 13th of 2023 mm-hmm. at the Honeywell Center. Mm-hmm. Is that the company too? That makes
the thermostat.
Yeah, those
yes,
folks.
Yes.
Yeah. Are they based out of Wabash?
They were, and then we were very fortunate to have significant endowment money and mm-hmm. a lot of money that was put into our community. We are a small community, but we have some fantastic philanthropists that have made our community stellar.
Yeah. So that summit was at the Honeywell Center there in Wabash a little less than a month ago, or more than a month ago, excuse me. So what is the Rural Justice Summit?
This summit was essentially the brainchild of Justice Goff, my dad, Mark, and myself. And then we were very fortunate along the way to have other Court of Appeals judges and Supreme Court justices get involved, as well as other people that work within the government, including people that represent in the governor's office and different things that way. It started out, and Justice Goff is from, a little backstory, Justice Goff is from Wabash.
Oh, okay.
So I went to Northfield, he went to Southwood. They were rival schools, but we get along well now. But he was originally from Wabash, and then he actually went onto the bench off of our Superior Court there in Wabash. And he saw a need, and I think this was also a need that has been recognized by Chief Justice Rush, as well as Judge May, who I know has written articles about it, that we have an attorney shortage in mm-hmm. rural communities, and trying to find a way to help rural communities navigate the justice system in maybe unique ways, recognizing that we have this attorney shortage. So we approached it more as a collaborative process in focusing in on what can leaders or people who are in rural communities, how can they work together in a better way, given this attorney shortage, given this potentially lack of access to the courts, to basically brainstorm ways to make those rural communities better by by more of a collaborative approach as opposed to just going strictly through the courts to get things done.
Right.
So it was kind of a big project. And then what we did from there is we had several speakers that spoke on different topics related to that. And I think one of the best things that came out of it is it started sparking conversations and it started sparking collaboration. So I had a lot of people afterwards tell me that they got business cards from other people that were there, other speakers, and that because of what, someone over here said, they now know that they can do X, Y, and Z. And it was even just we were maxed out at 350 people, primarily because we had a fantastic grant that was involved that also fed everybody, and the summit was free to attend. But we could only, while we could host more people at the Honeywell Center, to actually feed everybody, we needed to keep it to 350.
Yeah.
But we had to turn off registration, because we met our 350 cap. So that was great. But a lot of those people then connected with other attendees. And so it wasn't just connecting to the speakers and to the people who were presenting on it, but connecting like-minded people who had similar interests so that they can work together in a collaborative fashion to make their communities better. Because we had people that attended from throughout the state, but a lot of the attendees were from rural communities.
Okay. So I mean, was there any talk about why is there an attorney shortage in these smaller counties in Indiana, or is that just a result of demographic changes nationwide?
So I will tell you, I haven't personally done any significant studies on it,
Sure.
But there's different theories that I've heard. One, with the Valparaiso Law School closing, a lot of people who would graduate from Valpo practiced in Indiana, but we don't have that school anymore.
Okay.
Notre Dame, I think, and I'd say don't quote me on this, but I'm obviously quoting myself. But I believe that last I heard, I think maybe 80 to 90% of attendees from Notre Dame go back out of state. They don't stay in Indiana. Similarly, at IU Bloomington, a lot of attendees go back out of state. Yeah. Those are considered, Notre Dame and IU Maurer are both considered, I think, more national law schools. So the people who are coming are not staying in Indiana, maybe because they're not even originally from Indiana. So they don't stay. And then we have IU,
You're fine.
we have IU McKinney, which a significant more number do stay in Indiana, but because it's located in Indianapolis, I think a lot of people who are attending there tend to stay in Indianapolis or get a feel for a larger city or work in government. And then they gravitate back to the larger cities. Yeah.
And I mean, and that's me, I grew up in a small town in Florida, and then I just came to Indy,
Right.
So you did a presentation at the summit on strategies for effective representation of individuals with mental health concerns and while protecting their rights and their dignity.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about it?
So one thing, and this is going to my personal injury side of my practice. One thing I noticed is that to back up a little bit, being involved in a lawsuit is difficult for anybody. It's a lot of times it's dealing with complex issues, and this is why we go to law school, so that we can understand those. But to navigate those when you've been injured or when you've been through something major, it adds a level of difficulty on it. When you have, sustained some kind of brain injury, or, potentially just it's PTSD or some kind of an emotional trauma, because a lot of people, even if they are mentally capable of handling it, because of the emotional side of things, they don't want to. They get blocked. And it's very real, but that doesn't mean that they don't deserve justice just because they have a hard time facing what happened to them. So one of the things, what we addressed and how we've handled it in our own practice is to talk to our client, and if they're capable of signing a power of attorney or having a limited purpose power of attorney that can help them through the process, and is basically just someone that's there to assist them with the litigation side of things. That can be very helpful for both the individual who's been harmed, but also us as their attorney, because part of what they're dealing with, they don't want to face
Right.
what happened. So to try to talk to them about and to get information, through the discovery process, it can be difficult and does more harm to them by continuing to bring up this when they're not ready to handle it.
Yeah.
But through a power of attorney, that's one way to handle it. And I have had decent success at, having power of attorneys then review the interrogatories or review the request for production of documents and that kind of things to be able to get the discovery process still underway. Another way that we've done it is through that we talked about is having guardianships appointed or a guardian appointed.
Oh.
So we do it as a limited purpose guardian where the court actually steps in and says, for purposes of this, they are the guardian of this individual. Sometimes we'll call it a conservatorship. It kind of means the same thing, but it has a little bit different connotation to it.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll do a limited purpose conservatorship so that this is the designated person. When we've had difficulty with maybe the defendant on the other side not wanting to accept the power of attorney, the limited purpose conservatorship kind of gets around that issue because that's a court order showing that this is the person who's authorized to act on behalf of this injured individual for purposes of this lawsuit. So that's one of the things that I talked about and addressed at the summit.
Very cool. Switching gears just a little bit, you've litigated cases across the state, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what, as an attorney that works as an office in a small town in Indiana, what would you say is the biggest difference between litigating in a larger metro area like Indianapolis versus Wabash County?
Well, when I have trials in Wabash County, I know most of the jurors. I've had cousins who I've called up onto the jury that have been in the jury box before. They surprisingly didn't make it onto the jury.
Yeah.
And there's also even when I've been in rural communities where maybe I didn't know everybody that was on the jury. In the rural communities, the jury members are going to know the witnesses. They're going to know the plaintiff. They may know the defendant, depending on who the defendant is. So there's definitely connections with all of that you have to be more aware of. And I really work to ferret it out with my clients as to, okay, how do we feel about this? How do they feel about you?
Yeah.
What are all the connections there? So
yeah. I remember Bill and I tried a case in Benton County, Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
We received our jury questionnaires 30 days before trial. I mean, and then the last one I saw Katie Karras in my office try one. She got the jury questionnaires for about 15 minutes before died.
There is a difference. Yes.
Yeah. So, and I will say, I was actually just talking to another lawyer in my office about it. He was mentioning how he would love, he's a native Hoosier, but he went to school in Miami, Florida, and then came back to practice here. But he loves the camaraderie in the small towns, like where you could walk into the court, you know the clerk, the judge, everyone kind of knows each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Very much so. And there's definitely a connection there where, everybody does know each other. It also is the case that typically in the smaller towns or the rural communities with the way that the caseloads are, if you want a quick jury trial or if you want to get scheduled, they're usually a lot more cooperative with you in getting that scheduled. So
yeah. Your practice is not limited to personal injury cases, right?
Correct.
You guys do a lot of other things. I saw on your website, estate planning, estate administration, business, transactional work, as well as litigation and real estate stuff too.
Yes.
Do you do both transactional work and litigation type work?
I kind of do it all. So that's one of the things about working in a rural community. My clients, our clients are usually people that, play the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. It's usually 2 degrees of either my dad or I, because they either know us from going to school with us, are related to us, or know somebody that knows us, and therefore everybody feels like you feel connected to them.
Yeah.
And so we love our personal injury work. It's probably what I would say that we're both the most passionate about. But we also recognize that being in a rural community, we have, I don't want to say an obligation because it doesn't feel like it's anything negative.
Yeah.
But we feel a responsibility to the members of our community to help them when we can. at least in the areas of law that we practice in. So in deciding what areas we wanted to practice in, I knew I didn't want to do criminal defense work. It's just not my forte. But basically anything else that would kind of walk in the door that somebody needed help with, if we could help them, we try to help them.
Yeah, that's very cool. I mean, going back to your Rural Justice Summit, I mean, that's the whole point, right?
Right.
You said you don't feel like you have an obligation, but, there's only so many lawyers in Wabash.
Right.
I mean, that's what I saw was a town of 10,000 people, roughly. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that has that population gone down?
Our population has dropped some over the years, whereas most communities are growing. And I don't have a good reason for that. Wabash is fantastic. So if anybody wants to move there, but we have a town of 10,000, but I would say, so Wabash City is located in Wabash County.
Right.
So, which is not where Wabash College is. A lot of people get that one confused. But when people say they're from Wabash, they usually are referencing the county as a whole.
Okay.
Or at least there are some towns within the county as well. If they live within the town proper, they're going to say that, that they're from Rowan, they're from North Manchester, they're from. Mm-hmm. But if they're just in the rural parts of Wabash, people usually say that they're from Wabash because it's part of the county. So it could be, 15 minutes from the city, but they're still from Wabash. So, so even though, in talking about in terms of, a town of 10,000, we actually kind of service the whole county.
Right.
Because our county is what's limited in terms of attorneys.
Right. So. Right. And North Manchester, is that where Manchester College is?
It is. Yes.
We played them and I went to Hanover.
Okay. Yes. So you would be in the same.
Yeah. We were in the same division with them. We played them. That was a very modern looking school from what I remember. Yeah. Yeah. They were not good at football.
I think they've got a decent soccer team and their track team is really well.
But that was I think it was my freshman year, and I was a Florida kid. I'd never even been to the Midwest. So kind of traveling across. So as far as the other practice areas, you guys do any family law?
We used to do quite a bit of family law. My dad used to do the family law side of our practice. He actually has gotten out of that I would say about a year ago. He kind of started transitioning out of that. So we don't anymore, but we did used to do quite a bit.
What are some challenges that you've had to overcome, professionally, especially as a female trial in Indiana?
So that's a good question. And it's one that I've given some consideration to, primarily because I would hear stories of other female trial attorneys and some of the adversity that they had to overcome. And I will say I've been very blessed. I've been practicing now for 20 years. I've always practiced with my dad. I've never felt like a female trial lawyer. I've just felt like a trial lawyer because my gender in terms of that has never really played a role. I think part of that's because my dad and I laugh a little bit, but he's nicer than I am usually. I'm not saying I can't be nice, but he's usually the softer touch and that he's just a nicer person. So we always talk about kind of the role reversal with it. But one thing I will say, and it hasn't happened to me a lot, but I have gotten it some, is with some defense attorneys. And it's not the defense attorneys that you run or that I've ran up to repeatedly. It's the kind of the ones that would be, just like because you have some
a one-off.
That's what I was going to say. A one-off. You don't see them very often. Yeah. But on those occasions, I have gotten the listen here, little girl.
Oh my.
And well, you might know about this, but you don't know about that. And I've been doing this longer. And the little girl thing, I think bothers me the most, especially when I think, 45. And I mean, it was, it was a little startling. And I actually think the guy that said it to me was younger than me. So I really didn't know how to take that, but that's really, but that's just been, maybe one or two occasions that I've had that happen. And I really think it says more about them than it says about me. So It really didn't bother me, except that it ticked me off. And let's just say things became more difficult for their client after that because I wasn't going to put up with that.
Oh my. Along those same lines, we've all kind of had crazy fact patterns or cases that we've dealt with. You know, I like to say to my wife and my friends that as a plaintiff's attorney, personal injury lawyer, you really learn about all the wild and crazy ways that people find to either hurt or kill themselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Any kind of fact pattern like that or case that kind of sticks in your head, like, you know, wild kind of thing?
I don't have necessarily a fact pattern for like of the actual facts that's jumping to mind. What comes to mind, though, is we had a case where we were doing, you're going to remember it, and I'm blanking on the name for it, but not a mock jury, but where you...
oh, yeah, the like a mock trial.
Like a mock trial type thing, where we were brainstorming, and we kind of did it in a very relaxed fashion to where we said, okay, here's the set of facts. Now you discuss. Yeah. And I mean, it was a little more complicated than that, but we did this. And so we gave these facts, and it was a tragic case where it involved a wheel coming off because the lug nuts weren't properly tightened. Mm-hmm. And then, unfortunately, this lovely family their lives were destroyed. But as we were going through and talking with, you know, the mock jurors about all of this, we kind of let them just free flow ideas and discuss on their own. And because we gave them the facts from both sides, and then we expected they were going to come out and say like, oh yeah, this was a problem, or no, this wasn't a problem. Mm-hmm. And they started coming up with these ideas that, well, maybe because the gentleman who was injured had some attractive older daughters that were not part of the crash, but they decided that the older daughter was someone that had been dating somebody that worked at this tire company. And he was then jealous because she would no longer date him. Oh my. And so then he took that out on her dad by, you know, tightening the lug nuts on this wheel incorrectly. And we didn't put any of that into their minds. That wasn't, I mean, other than the fact that he had this daughter, here's what their daughters look like, she'll testify on this, that kind of thing. But they concocted this entire story, this backstory, to try to explain the situation. And I think it was not a crazy fact pattern in the sense that it was the actual facts, but a crazy fact pattern in the sense that it shows the links that I think we as people go to try to create a scenario so that it won't happen to us.
Right.
So they, you know, and I can't just say our jurors, because I would do the same thing. Yeah. I don't want something bad to happen to me and the people I care about. Right. And I don't want to think that somebody else's mistake, you know, that I can't control is going to change my life forever, or change my kids' lives forever, or my husband's life forever. So, you know, we create these stories to show that we can control the situation. Yeah. And if we can control it, then it won't happen to us. Right. Unfortunately, as you know, it can happen to anybody, and you could just be driving down the road doing everything right, then tragedy can still strike. Yeah. And that's where we usually get involved.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I have a couple follow-up questions. Who are some of your mentors or people that have, you know, kind of influenced you in your life?
Well, I'm sure it'll come as no surprise that I say my dad has had a significant impact on me, and I think I talked about him. But I was fortunate to have two parents who were very supportive growing up, and who continue to be very supportive now. I have two sisters, and we all have very different personalities. Mm-hmm. And what I love is that by getting to know them, and just knowing the way that they are, it kind of helps me connect with more people, because I know that, okay, I'm good at X. Mm-hmm. And even though my sister may not be as good at X, she's fantastic at Y. You know, I've got one sister that's extremely creative, and she's free-spirited, and she's very in tune with people. And then another sister who's a teacher, and she's probably the most phenomenal teacher. I'm bragging, but she's probably the most phenomenal teacher out there, in the way that she connects with her students and makes learning fun. And then my husband and my boys just teach me every day different. They challenge me and they they make me look at things differently. And I'll be going along thinking I have all the answers or that I know something. And then they'll say something that just really just makes me stop and have to rethink everything. So I would say that, the people who have had the biggest influence on me is my family. And they continue to teach me things every day. I don't always like to admit it when they've taught me things, but they do.
That's great. And your dad, like I said, I've known him for a while. He's a great guy.
Thank you.
He really is. And an excellent. You have an excellent reputation, in the legal community for being tough and also fair and pragmatic when it comes to your cases. What is one piece of advice that you would give to young lawyers or practitioners who are trying to kind of ride that fine line?
I think that you can be both kind when dealing with opposing counsel or people that are, on the opposite side of an issue as you, and you can respect where they're coming from, but still be adamant and driven in your position and in your desire to represent your client's interests and to serve them.
Yeah.
So I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. I think a lot of it comes down to it took me a while to get used to this, but we do so much by email. It's easier, it's faster. We've got a record of it. What I try to do is I try to call opposing counsel on an issue to discuss it. If I know it's going to be something that, may be a difficult conversation, I'll try to discuss it with them and then follow it up with an email or just to kind of do a, hey, heads up, here's what I'm thinking. And a lot of times I also always put in my emails, please reach out to me so that we can discuss further. Right. Because there may be some things that I'm putting out there that I know they don't want to be cold called about.
Right.
But I always find that in those discussions then is to say, I understand where you're coming from on this. I appreciate that that's the position that your client wants you to take and that you're going to need to take. I'm coming at it from a different perspective, and we're going to have to agree to disagree on this. Yeah. And not that you want to take every issue to the court to have it resolved, because if you can get it worked out to where you give a little, they give a little, and get a resolution, it's better for everybody. But understand that there's going to be some things that you can't resolve that way. And then you just recognize, and I tell opposing counsel, that's why we have judges. They've got to call the balls and strikes. But it can be said in a way that you're not belittling them as a person. It's just recognizing you're on the opposite side of an issue.
Yeah. If I'm in Wabash and I'm hungry and I need a good meal, where do I go?
Oh, my goodness. That's a great question. We actually have a lot of really nice restaurants. So I would say Market Street Grill is a good one. If you're looking for, I guess, steaks and hearty food, that kind of thing. We have a wonderful Charlie Creek Inn, if you're going to stay downtown in Wabash. Okay. I talked about how we have some fantastic philanthropists. The Ford family has done a lot for Wabash, and they renovated this hotel, so it's like set in the 1920s.
Oh, wow.
So they've got a restaurant in there. There's a newer one called Four Partners in Crime that has kind of like a tapas style, and it's very artistic. They display local artisan work, fantastic drinks. So those are three that come to mind, but there are more. You need to come. I'll take you on a tour.
Oh my, that sounds like I need to come up there and visit. And if any of our listeners, where can they go to learn more about you and your practice?
So we do. We have a website, and I'll do a little plug for my husband's company. It's Green Hat Productions. They do our website and a lot of our marketing, but it's just Gueninlaw.com.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Emily. I appreciate it. It's been great.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks for listening to the Circle City Conversations podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more future conversations.